My name is Marion Cole, and I'll never forget the moment I realized something in my world had cracked. For nearly 2 weeks, my son Aaron hadn't returned a single call. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing, that work had swallowed his time, that maybe he was simply exhausted. But a mother's instinct is sharper than any excuse. When silence stretches too long, it carries weight, and this silence felt heavy. On a gray evening in late winter, I could no longer stand waiting. I packed a small bag and boarded a bus bound for Cleveland. The ride was endless, every mile gnawing at my chest as I stared out the window. My stomach twisted itself into knots I couldn't untangle. By the time I stepped off, the icy wind cut straight through my coat. It bit into my skin as I walked the familiar street to Aaron's townhouse. The house looked unchanged from the outside, quiet and ordinary, but my heart raced as I climbed the steps and knocked. Aaron? It's Mom. No sound came back. I tried again, louder this time, but still nothing. Finally, I pressed my hand to the doorknob, half expecting resistance. To my horror, it turned freely. Aaron never left his door unlocked. Not when Leo, his little boy, was inside. The air felt strange as I stepped into the living room. It looked as if a storm had ripped through it. The sofa was shoved sideways, cushions scattered, a broken coffee mug lay in pieces across the floor. Dark stains, sharp against the pale carpet, made my chest tighten until breathing hurt. I called out for my grandson, my voice breaking as it echoed through the hollow silence. No answer. I moved carefully through the mess, stepping over shards of glass as my pulse hammered in my ears. Upstairs, I checked every room. Empty. Too empty. Then, in Leo's bedroom, I froze. A faint scraping sound came from beneath the bed. My legs locked, refusing to bend. My hand trembled against the desk as I whispered, "Leo?" My voice cracked with both hope and terror. The sound didn't stop. I stumbled back, fumbling with my phone, and dialed the police with shaking fingers. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights washed across the front windows. 2 officers hurried inside, their boots crunching against broken glass as I led them up the stairs. At Leo's room, I pointed to the bed with a hand that would not steady. The younger officer crouched low, speaking calmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen fear before. "It's all right," he said softly. "Is someone under there?" No reply. Just silence. With a swift motion, he lifted the frame, and there he was. Leo. My sweet grandson. Curled in on himself, as thin as a shadow, his hair tangled, cheeks sunken, clutching an empty plastic bottle like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. His eyes, vacant, unblinking, stared past us, hollow and lost. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him tight, but my hands shook too violently. My voice caught in my throat. The officer lifted him gently, and I stumbled behind as they carried him out into the bitter night. The siren wailed as we sped through the streets toward the hospital. I sat in the back, whispering over and over, "Grandma's here, Leo. You're safe now." But his eyes never left that faraway place. At the hospital, the emergency team swept Leo away into a brightly lit room. Their voices carried urgency wrapped in calm, a rhythm they must have practiced countless times. I stood in the doorway, clutching my coat as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. Nurses moved around him in quick precision, checking his pulse, slipping an IV into his fragile arm, murmuring words like severe dehydration and malnutrition. Each phrase landed like a stone in my chest. The boy I once knew, the one who used to giggle over building Lego towers with his father, lay still, his eyes open but staring into a place far away. I whispered his name again and again, but he gave no sign he heard me. His small fingers clutched that empty plastic bottle so tightly the crinkling echoed in the room. It was as if he feared letting go of the only thing he thought he still controlled. I stayed beside him through the night. Machines hummed softly, keeping track of what his frail body could not. Nurses brought me blankets, tissues, even tea I couldn't bring myself to drink. Nothing reached the boy lying under those stark white sheets. Desperate, I began humming the lullaby I once sang to Aaron when he was young, an old melody about safe harbors and gentle skies. My voice trembled, but I hoped some small piece of Leo's heart would remember. Still, he lay silent. On the third night, as I sat half awake in the chair by his bed, my phone buzzed. The number on the screen made my stomach twist. It was the precinct. With shaking hands, I answered. "Mrs. Cole." The detective's voice was steady but grave. "We re-examined your son's house with luminol." It revealed a large amount of blood in the living room. The words hit like ice water down my spine. Blood. Too much blood. I gripped the phone tighter, unable to form a reply. The detective paused, then spoke the words I had dreaded since the moment I stepped into Aaron's unlocked door. "We are now treating this as a possible homicide." My knees weakened. I nearly dropped the phone, my breath shuddering as the world tilted. At that exact moment, Leo stirred. His small hand tugged weakly at my sleeve, and when I looked down, I saw tears brimming in his wide eyes. And then, after days of silence, his voice broke through, raw and trembling. "Dad, he's gone," Leo whispered, choking on the words. The sound pierced the sterile hospital air sharper than any blade. My heart cracked wide open. I pulled him into my arms, rocking him as tears streamed down my cheeks. "No, sweetheart," I murmured, though my voice betrayed me with its trembling. "It isn't certain yet. They're still looking." But even as I spoke, the detective's voice echoed in my ear, heavy and unrelenting. Possible homicide. And deep down, I knew my grandson's words carried more truth than any official report. Even before that stormy night, there had been signs that Aaron's life was unraveling. I remember clearly the first time he brought Sabrina home. She was young, eager to please, with a shy smile that made me believe she truly loved him. She offered to help with the dishes, laughed nervously when she spilled a little water on the counter. Back then, I thought my son had found someone who would stand by him through every season of life. For a while, it seemed I was right. They married, and when Leo was born, their home glowed with new warmth. But as years passed, cracks appeared. Sabrina had a weakness for gambling. At first, it was just casual bets, shrugged off as harmless fun. But soon debts grew, and collectors began calling at all hours. Aaron, ever the protector, sold his car to cover what she owed. He even came to me once, eyes red and voice heavy, asking for help. I gave him my savings, convincing myself it was only once. But debts have a way of multiplying like shadows. Arguments grew louder, harsher. One visit, I walked into their kitchen and found Leo cowering in a corner, tears streaking his face while Sabrina shouted at him for spilling milk. Aaron stood helplessly nearby, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of the world pressed down on him. My heart broke, watching him drown in chaos he couldn't escape. When the divorce finally came, I thought perhaps peace might follow. Aaron won custody of Leo, and for a short time, their home felt calmer. But debts don't vanish just because a marriage ends, and Sabrina's hunger for money was not something a court order could erase. At the hospital, the detective asked Leo if he remembered what had happened that night. The boy's hand trembled in mine, but I assured him he was safe. After a long silence, his small voice finally broke. "It was raining really hard," he whispered, eyes fixed on the blanket covering him. "I was playing with my Legos when the doorbell rang, again and again." He paused, swallowing hard. Dad went to the door. He looked through the peephole, and his face got tight. He told me to hide under my bed and not to come out until he said so. I didn't understand, but he pushed me to my room and pulled the blanket low. Tears filled his eyes as he continued. Mom came in. She wasn't alone. There was a tall man with her. She asked Dad where I was. He said I was with Grandma. She started yelling about money, saying he owed too much. Dad told her she had already taken everything. The man pushed him. then pushed again, harder. I heard a crack when Dad's head hit the table. He fell and didn't move. Leo's little body shook with sobs as he clung to me. His words painted the very nightmare I feared. Sabrina had returned, and she hadn't come alone. When I pushed my chair back, the legs scraped against the polished floor, louder than I expected, sharp enough to slice through the shallow laughter that had been bouncing around the table. The entire restaurant seemed to pause with me. Forks hung midair, glasses hovered at lips, even the waiters froze. The $1,980 bill sat there like a weapon aimed directly at me. My sister's smug grin daring me to accept the hit without a fight. For years, I had been the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who paid without complaint. My mother had always leaned on me, not with gratitude but with expectation. My sister, on the other hand, thrived on being the golden child. Tonight was supposed to be her celebration, but as usual, I had been cast in the role of financier and scapegoat. I looked at my mother first. She still had her glass raised, a thin smile glued to her face, as if nothing unusual had happened. Her words, "She's the daughter I'm proud of," echoed in my ears, souring with every second. Proud? Proud enough to humiliate me in front of strangers? Proud enough to treat me like a walking wallet? Then my eyes shifted to my sister. She leaned back in her chair, one eyebrow raised, lips curled in a smirk that told me everything. She knew this was planned. She had set me up. She wanted to see if I would bend again, if I would break quietly like I always did. I placed both hands on the edge of the table and stood tall. My voice, when it came, was calm but sharp enough to cut glass. $1,980. That's quite a bill. No one spoke. Even my sister's smirk faltered. "You know," I continued, "I've spent years paying for dinners, for birthdays, for holidays, because I thought family meant sacrifice. But tonight, it's clear that family, at least to some of you, means taking advantage." Gasps rippled through the table. My mother's face flushed crimson. My sister tried to interject, but I held up a hand. "No, you don't get to speak. Not this time." I picked up the bill and held it in the air. "This is not mine to carry anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again." Then, in one slow movement, I set it down in front of my sister. Her smirk vanished. "What are you doing?" she snapped. "What I should have done a long time ago," I replied. "You're the favorite. You're the daughter Mom brags about. You're the one who's always celebrated. So tonight, you get the honor of paying for it, too." The silence was deafening. The waiter shifted uncomfortably, unsure of whether to intervene. My mother sputtered something about disrespect, about embarrassing her in public. But I was done. "You embarrassed me the second you handed that bill to me like I was nothing more than a checkbook. I won't apologize for finally standing up." I reached for my coat. My hands weren't shaking, not anymore. Years of bottled anger and hurt had finally burned away into something solid, resolve. As I walked toward the door, the room behind me erupted in whispers. My sister's voice, high-pitched and angry, tried to chase me, but I didn't turn back. For the first time in my life, I didn't owe anyone at that table a thing. Outside, the cool night air wrapped around me like freedom. I took a deep breath and smiled to myself. The weight wasn't mine anymore. Not the bill, not the guilt, not the burden of being the reliable one who was always exploited. They wanted silence from me tonight. Instead, they got a reckoning. And that silence they were left with, that was theirs to carry. For once, I finally walked away lighter,